They had waited their entire lives for this. After decades of working long shifts and raising 3 children in Ohio, Harold and June Whitmore were finally free. In the summer of 1986, they packed up their brand new RV, still smelling of fresh upholstery and adventure, and set off on a cross-country retirement road trip they'd dreamed about for years. They left behind photo albums, unpaid bills, and an answering machine message that simply said, "Gone exploring. Be back before the leaves fall." Family members waved goodbye in the driveway, expecting weekly postcards and maybe the occasional collect call from a payphone. Harold, 68, had meticulously planned the entire route: Yellowstone, Mount Rushmore, and eventually the Arizona desert, where they'd settle in for a long stay. June, 66, had packed her notebooks, always jotting down thoughts and feelings. She said it helped her hold on to the small things. Their departure was cheerful, but it would be the last time anyone saw them. For months the family heard nothing. At first it didn't raise alarms. They were free-spirited and purposefully offline. But by October, silence turned to unease. Their eldest son drove their intended route but found no sign of them. The RV never turned up at campsites. No receipts, no credit card charges, no trail. It was as if the RV had been swallowed by the country's vastness. The police opened a case, but without evidence of foul play or even direction, it stalled. In 1986, databases were limited, and interstate communication between departments was spotty at best. All that remained was a haunting question that echoed through the family for years. How could 2 people and an entire RV vanish into thin air? Life moved on. Their children got older. Grandchildren were born. But Harold and June remained ghosts, memories frozen in the frame of a Polaroid on the fridge. Every year, on the anniversary of their disappearance, the family held a quiet vigil. They clung to hope, even as that hope faded into something quieter. Acceptance, maybe. Until 21 years later, in the summer of 2007, a drought drained a remote reservoir in northern Utah. What emerged stunned locals: the rusted roof of a submerged RV, barely visible through the muddy water. Emergency responders pulled it from the lakebed piece by piece, reporters swarming the scene. Inside, everything was mostly intact: a blanket still folded, a pair of reading glasses, and sealed in a weathered tin box under the passenger seat was a handwritten note. The note changed everything. When the first week passed without a call or postcard from Harold and June Whitmore, their children weren't immediately alarmed. After all, the couple had talked about truly disconnecting. No phones, no rush, just the open road and each other. But by the 3rd week, concern began to gnaw at their oldest son, Patrick. He called every RV park along their planned route, from the Ohio border to Utah, and each time he was met with the same response: no Whitmores checked in, no record of the vehicle, no sightings. It was as if they'd never begun the trip. Patrick contacted police in 3 states, but with no evidence of a crime, departments hesitated to take action. The couple were adults, free to travel, and not technically overdue. Patrick and his siblings began retracing the route themselves. They posted flyers at rest stops, diners, and ranger stations. They visited hospitals, morgues, even shelters, clinging to hope that perhaps a medical emergency or memory lapse had waylaid them. Nothing, not a single confirmed sighting, not one trace of the RV, a vehicle that large seemingly impossible to hide. The media picked up the story by late November 1986. Headlines like "Retired Couple Vanishes on Scenic Route" and "Where Are the Whitmores" made small waves in regional newspapers, but without new developments, the case quickly lost momentum. The family, however, refused to give up. They organized a volunteer search through a stretch of Utah wilderness the couple was meant to pass through, but it yielded nothing. Just wind, dust, and emptiness. In desperation, the family turned to a private investigator in early 1987. He theorized the RV may have been stolen, the couple abducted, and the vehicle taken across state lines or destroyed. But without proof, law enforcement couldn't escalate the case. Years passed. Harold's pension stopped issuing checks after the 3rd year. June's favorite sister died in 1991, and still no sign, no call, no closure. The family's grief transformed into routine sorrow. Every birthday, every anniversary became a soft wound reopened. Patrick, now with 2 children of his own, kept a small framed photo of his parents on the dashboard of his truck. He'd whispered to it before long drives, "Where did you go?" Meanwhile, the RV's make and model slowly became outdated. By the late 90s, fewer people remembered it. Theirs wasn't a headline-grabbing case, it was quiet, haunting, forgotten, until the summer of 2007, when a teenage boy named Austin Kellner was skipping stones along the drought-depleted edge of Whisper Lake in northern Utah. A shimmer of metal caught his eye beneath the shallow water. Curious, he stepped closer and called out to his father. What they thought was a piece of scrap metal soon revealed itself to be part of a vehicle, an RV roof, sun-bleached and rusting. Authorities were called immediately. When the vehicle was pulled out, license plates confirmed it. The Whitmores RV, intact, sealed, and inside, a message no one was prepared for. The RV's exterior was encrusted with 2 decades of silt and mineral buildup. Its windows, though cracked, had held, preserving much of the interior. Investigators and divers worked carefully, section by section, documenting every item as if it were a time capsule. A faded blanket still lay across the back seat, neatly folded. On the kitchen counter sat a rusted coffee thermos beside a half-written grocery list in June's handwriting. The fridge door had been sealed shut from pressure, its contents now unrecognizable. And on the dashboard, tucked beneath the sun visor, was a road map with small red circles around several locations, none of them matching the planned route the family had originally known. But it was the tin container beneath the passenger seat that froze the recovery team. Inside, they found a sealed envelope, remarkably preserved in wax paper and tape. The note inside, written in blue ink and dated July 9, 1986, less than 2 weeks after the Whitmores had left home, read, "If someone finds this, please give it to our children. We're not sure where we are. We thought we were being followed. We tried to hide. We love you." It was signed by both Harold and June. The handwriting was shaky. Investigators immediately treated the note as critical evidence. The possibility of foul play, long dismissed due to lack of evidence, surged back into the conversation. The note contradicted every assumption made over the past 2 decades, that the couple had simply gotten lost, or worse, driven off a cliff by accident. This letter suggested intent, fear, a decision to hide. The RV had not crashed. There were no dents or signs of collision. The handbrake was set. Both front seats were empty. No bodies were found inside, only their belongings, frozen in time. One ranger noted that the spot where the RV had been submerged wasn't visible from the main road. It was a rarely accessed service path used decades ago by maintenance crews, and the lake itself had expanded over the years due to shifting water levels, meaning the vehicle could have been intentionally hidden in a shallow basin that later filled with water. The discovery made headlines instantly. "Vanished couple's RV found after 21 years," read the Salt Lake Tribune. "Message from the past. Did the Whitmores hide themselves?" speculated a tabloid. The family, stunned by the news, flew out immediately to witness the recovery. Patrick, now graying and weary, stood on the muddy shoreline as the RV was lifted from the water, unable to speak. He clutched the recovered note like a fragile lifeline. Authorities began reopening the investigation. Local police, along with state agencies, combed through every old report, witness statement, and clue. But the biggest question loomed over everything. Who or what had made the Whitmores feel hunted in the first place? That note hinted at something far darker than an accident, something or someone that had followed them into the silence. The note changed everything. Investigators shifted their focus from accident to potential criminal involvement. The wording, "We're not sure where we are, and we thought we were being followed," sent a chill through every investigator reading it. The phrasing suggested confusion but also caution. The Whitmores were not panicked, but aware enough to hide the note, to attempt preservation, and to include a message for their children. The lake where the RV was found, Whisper Lake, was known to few. In the 1980s, it wasn't even marked on standard tourist maps. Local historians confirmed that in 1986, road access to the area was limited to fire service routes and occasional forest ranger patrols. It was not a place a couple from Ohio would accidentally stumble into. The Whitmores had deliberately gone off-grid. But why? Detectives reopened every file from the original missing persons report. A pattern began to emerge, one that hadn't stood out in the 80s. In the weeks leading up to their trip, June had made several large withdrawals from their joint savings account. No one in the family had known. In total, over $9,000 had been taken out in cash. Back then, that amount wasn't automatically flagged. Harold's best friend, a fellow retired schoolteacher, came forward with something new. In the days before their departure, Harold had expressed unease. He'd said something about a man at the rest stop who had been sitting in a car with binoculars watching them. The friend hadn't thought much of it then, just travel jitters perhaps. But now, paired with the note, it sounded eerily specific. Investigators scoured surveillance footage from rest stops, even though most had long been erased or lost. Then a breakthrough came from an unlikely source, an elderly amateur radio operator named Glenn Brower. In July 1986, Glenn had logged an unusual emergency broadcast signal while scanning open frequencies on his ham radio. It was brief, only a few seconds, but he'd noted the date and time, July 9th, 1986, the same date on the Whitmores note. He remembered a trembling female voice saying, "They're still behind us. We don't know who they are," before it cut out. At the time, he'd tried to report it, but with no way to trace the signal or context, no one followed up. Now, after 21 years, it was more than just a memory. It was a timestamp. Police attempted to cross-reference that radio frequency with known emergency channels, but the trail had long gone cold. Still, the detail reinforced the possibility that someone had indeed been following the Whitmores, and that they knew it. With every new clue, the mystery grew more personal. Not only had the couple vanished, but the signs now pointed toward premeditated concealment, possibly even fear for their lives. But one thing was still missing: the Whitmores themselves. The RV was empty, no trace of them, no human remains, just silence and that haunting note. After the discovery of the submerged RV, media interest reignited, and the Whitmore case returned to national headlines. But beyond the buzz, silence returned just as swiftly. Despite the official reopening of the investigation and the involvement of specialized recovery teams, the months that followed yielded no new evidence. Underwater searches near the lake brought nothing: no human remains, no personal items, no signs of where Harold and June may have gone after their RV was parked. The forest surrounding Whisper Lake was combed thoroughly, with cadaver dogs and thermal drones brought in. But 21 years had passed. Any organic traces had long been erased by time. In place of evidence, what began to emerge were false leads, rumors, and confusion. A waitress in Idaho claimed to have served coffee to a couple who looked exactly like the Whitmores 4 years after their disappearance. She said the woman seemed nervous, and the man clutched a hand-drawn map, whispering directions. But there were no security tapes, no receipts, nothing to support her account. In upstate New York, an anonymous tip suggested the couple was living under new names in an off-the-grid commune. Authorities investigated, only to find 2 elderly residents who resembled the missing pair but were entirely unrelated. Another theory surfaced. The Whitmores had witnessed something during their travels, something they shouldn't have seen, and had entered witness protection. That speculation took hold when a retired gas station attendant in Arizona came forward. He remembered Harold using a payphone and speaking in a hushed tone, mentioning that someone from the road couldn't be trusted. But again, no phone records, no further details, just a fading memory. As years went by, each new lead became increasingly unreliable. Time blurred facts, twisted recollections, and opened the door to myth-making. The couple's children, now adults with families of their own, began quietly accepting the possibility that closure might never come. Patrick, their eldest son, had maintained a binder filled with every call, article, and rumor related to the case. In a 2010 interview, he admitted he'd stopped updating it. "It all starts to feel like an echo," he said. "Different voices, same dead ends." In an effort to keep the case alive, an independent documentary team took interest. They interviewed family members, old neighbors, and hikers who had traveled along similar routes in the summer of 1986. One account stood out. A woman, part of a group of backpackers, recalled seeing an RV parked deep off a forest trail. She remembered two older adults standing outside it. The man kept looking over his shoulder, she said, like he was expecting someone to follow. When asked to mark the location on a map, she did, less than 2 kilometers from where the RV was eventually found. It was a tiny detail, buried in the noise, but maybe, just maybe, it could help reconstruct the Whitmores' final moments. The renewed attention around the RV discovery and the documentary team's work brought one unexpected consequence. A former park ranger, now retired and living in Montana, reached out anonymously. He claimed that in the fall of 1986, several months after the Whitmores disappeared, he and a colleague had stumbled upon a strange campsite while patrolling a rarely used forest road near Whisper Lake. The site was abandoned, but there were signs of a hasty exit, 2 folding chairs left behind, a burned-out campfire and a pair of glasses lying in the dirt. The ranger recalled thinking it odd, but with no missing persons bulletin matching that location at the time, he'd moved on. Now, watching the coverage and seeing the Whitmores' photos, he was certain the glasses looked just like Harold's. Investigators revisited the area based on his memory, but so many years later, nature had reclaimed everything. Trees had grown, trails had shifted, and any evidence that might have been there was gone. Still, the ranger's recollection added to a growing theory. Harold and June hadn't simply vanished while driving. They had camped, waited, and perhaps met someone. But who? And why? Stranger still was the analysis of the note found inside the RV. Forensic specialists were able to determine that it was written with a pen manufactured in the late 1980s, not earlier, suggesting it had been placed in the vehicle years after their disappearance. Even more puzzling was the handwriting. Experts noted that while it resembled Harold's script from letters he'd written to his children, there were subtle inconsistencies, certain letter formations and slants that didn't match. Was it a forgery? Or had Harold written it under stress or duress? The note read like a farewell. "We thought we were safe. If you find this, we tried." Those 7 words became the center of speculation across internet forums and cold case groups. Some believed the couple had been running from someone or something. Others thought they had staged their own disappearance, though no motive ever made sense. The idea that they feared for their lives only deepened the mystery. Why would a retired couple, with no enemies or debts, vanish so deliberately? Meanwhile, an aging hiker came forward after watching the documentary. In 1986, he said, he had passed a man and woman on a remote trail near the lake. They looked out of place, he recalled. Not scared, just tense, like they were watching for something behind them. The woman had a red scarf tied around her head, and the man carried a camera that matched June's typical appearance and Harold's hobby, photography. But again, no photos were ever recovered. If the camera existed, it was never found. These scattered memories painted a picture of 2 people who didn't simply vanish, but were perhaps hunted or hiding. Yet from whom? And what was it they had tried? As investigators and amateur sleuths debated, the sense of something unfinished hung heavy over the case. The RV had resurfaced, but the Whitmores had not. The year after the RV was discovered, in the spring of 2008, the Whitmore investigation was officially reopened by a newly assigned task force from the state's cold case unit. With advances in forensic technology and a trove of archived materials, they hoped to re-examine everything, from gas station receipts to interview tapes to the RV itself, now stored in a secure facility. The first shocking discovery came not from a clue in the field, but from the vehicle's undercarriage. When the RV had been pulled from Whisper Lake, the focus had been on the interior, the note, the absence of personal belongings, and the dust-covered dashboard. But a secondary inspection months later revealed that part of the exhaust system had been tampered with. A section of tubing appeared to have been cut and reattached with non-standard clamps. Forensic engineers suggested this could have caused carbon monoxide to leak inside the RV cabin, especially if windows were shut. Could this have been an accident, or something more sinister? Investigators now theorized that if the couple had been inside while the engine ran, they may have succumbed to poisoning. But that didn't align with the rest of the evidence. Why was the vehicle empty? Why had the note been left behind, seemingly after the fact? And how had the RV ended up submerged in a lake far from the road it had last been spotted on? A few weeks later, another strange piece of the puzzle emerged. A retired mechanic named Dennis Kroll reached out after reading an article in a local newspaper. He recognized a license plate number shown in the story. It had matched one from a vehicle that had entered his garage back in late 1987. He swore it was the Whitmores RV. According to his records, a middle-aged man, definitely not Harold, had brought the RV in for a coolant leak and left without giving a name. The man paid in cash and refused a receipt. This revelation shattered the timeline. If true, the RV had been driven and serviced more than a year after the couple disappeared. Surveillance footage was long gone, and the invoice, barely legible, didn't offer much more. But it opened a chilling possibility. Someone else had possession of the RV, someone who knew how to keep it hidden. The man's description didn't match any known associates of the Whitmores. He was described as nervous, tall, with a thin scar on his cheek. A sketch artist recreated the face based on Dennis's memory, and the image was circulated to the public. Tips flooded in, none credible. Yet for the first time, investigators had the outline of a potential suspect. Was this man responsible for the Whitmores' disappearance? Did he write the note? Was he the one who eventually ditched the vehicle in the lake years later, trying to bury the past for good? Whatever the truth was, it was clear now. The RV had a secret life after the Whitmores vanished, and someone out there might still know why. The release of the composite sketch triggered a new wave of interest. News segments, online forums, and true crime blogs all reignited with theories. Some were outlandish, suggesting the Whitmores had stumbled onto a government secret or were victims of a serial killer operating along highway corridors. Others were more grounded, focusing on the possibility that the mysterious man seen at the mechanic shop had either stolen the RV or been involved in a broader cover-up. Then came the most surprising lead yet. A woman named Carla Jensen, who had worked as a campground manager near the Nevada border in 1989, contacted authorities. She recalled a strange encounter with a man who fit the exact sketch description. He had stayed for 2 nights in a beat-up RV that matched the Whitmores' model. Carla said the man never came out during the day, only at night, and never spoke more than a few words. On the second night, she approached the RV to offer a map of hiking trails and saw something that still haunted her. There were photos taped to the inside of the window, photos of an older couple. They looked like they were sleeping in some of them, she said, but one photo, it looked like they weren't. Authorities searched the campground archives, but visitor logs from that era were long destroyed. Still, Carla's account was enough to revisit the area. Metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar were deployed, and while no bodies were found, a discovery was made just a few hundred meters from where the RV had once parked. Buried under a shallow layer of earth was a camera, damaged but mostly intact. The make and model matched the kind Harold was known to carry. Forensic specialists carefully extracted the film roll inside, and miraculously, several exposures survived. When the images were developed, they revealed a chilling sequence. The first few photos were innocent, shots of lakes, trees, June smiling beside a trail. Then came an image of a man partially obscured by shadows, standing behind the RV, watching. The final photo was taken inside the vehicle. June was in the frame, eyes wide, mid-sentence, almost as if she didn't know the picture was being taken. It was dated July 3rd, 1986, weeks after the couple had last made contact with their family. Experts authenticated the camera and the film stock, verifying it hadn't been tampered with. These images altered everything. They proved the Whitmores were alive long after their supposed disappearance, and that they were being followed. The man in the shadowed photo bore a striking resemblance to the mechanic's description. Investigators intensified their search, but the trail, once again, ran cold. Whoever this man was, he had disappeared just as completely as Harold and June had. But the story was no longer just a mystery. It was a manhunt, 3 decades overdue. And for the Whitmores family, each answer brought them closer to a haunting truth they may not be ready to face. With the discovery of the camera and the shadowy figure captured in one of the last surviving photos, investigators shifted their approach. The case had evolved from a tragic disappearance to a likely criminal investigation. The composite sketch was updated based on the photo, and for the first time, facial recognition software was applied. The system returned a possible match, a man named Curtis Ray Eldridge, a drifter with a long history of petty crimes, theft, and one arrest in the mid-1980s for impersonating a park ranger. His last known address had been a trailer park in Arizona, but he'd vanished from public records around 1990. Authorities canvassed the region, revisiting old associates, but most had long lost contact. Still, the pieces were beginning to form a clearer image, one of an opportunistic man who might have crossed paths with the Whitmores at the wrong moment. A deeper dig into Eldridge's background revealed something chilling. In 1985, he had worked briefly at a vehicle storage lot in Oregon, the same state where the Whitmores had spent the first leg of their retirement journey. Former co-workers described him as odd, volatile, and obsessed with watching others. One mentioned he would sometimes sit for hours watching customers through binoculars from the back office. Investigators theorized that Eldridge may have followed the Whitmores after servicing or observing their RV, eventually targeting them once they were isolated enough. The theory went like this. Harold and June, unaware of being watched, set up camp near Whisper Lake. At some point, Eldridge approached, possibly posing as someone in need of help, or even as an authority figure. Once inside their trust circle, something went wrong. The note found in the RV, "We thought we were safe. If you find this, we tried," now seemed like a message written under duress or in anticipation of the worst. But one question still haunted the case. Why wasn't there any evidence of struggle, and where were the Whitmores' remains? A break came when cadaver dogs were brought back to the area around Whisper Lake during a dry season when water levels had dropped. Near the lake's edge, they signaled strongly in a shallow patch of earth. Excavation began immediately. Bones were found, small, brittle, and buried with what appeared to be clothing fibers. DNA testing was ordered. Weeks later, the results confirmed the partial remains belonged to June Whitmore. Harold's remains were not found. This discovery cracked open another theory. Harold may have survived longer. Had he escaped and tried to hide the RV, or had he been forced to conceal it? Was the note written by him in a moment of desperation after burying his wife? Or was he a victim to the very end? The public response was overwhelming. News stations across the country ran the story, reigniting calls to locate Eldridge. But Curtis Ray Eldridge was a ghost. No bank records, no ID renewals, no digital footprint. It was as if he had vanished into the very wilderness that had hidden the Whitmores for so long. In the months following the confirmation of June Whitmore's remains, the case remained active but slow-moving. Harold's body was never found, and Curtis Ray Eldridge, now the prime suspect, continued to elude all efforts to locate him. Authorities expanded their search beyond state lines, checking records from Canada to Mexico, but no sign of Eldridge ever surfaced. It was as if he had simply vanished into smoke, a ghost left behind by a decades-old tragedy. Meanwhile, the Whitmores' only son, David, took to public platforms in a final plea for answers. Appearing on national television, he shared childhood photos, stories of his parents' love for travel, and the heartbreak of losing not just two people, but a lifetime of moments that never came. "My parents didn't just disappear," he said. "They were erased." The broadcast touched millions. Tips poured in, some helpful, others wild. But one stood out. A trucker named Joe Mathis contacted the tip line after seeing the sketch of Eldridge. He claimed that back in 1991, he had picked up a hitchhiker just south of the Nevada border who looked eerily similar. The man had a scar on his cheek and spoke in short, paranoid bursts. He kept looking over his shoulder. At one point, Joe said, the man muttered something strange. "Some things are better buried. You dig 'em up, they dig you back." Authorities traced the trucker's old route hoping for clues, but nothing substantial emerged. Still, Joe's account gave shape to the final image of Eldridge, a man on the run, haunted, maybe even proud of what he'd done. The final report from the cold case unit was released a year later. It concluded that Harold and June Whitmore had likely fallen victim to foul play during their RV trip. The note found in the vehicle was attributed to either Harold in a last attempt to communicate or to the perpetrator, possibly mocking the investigation. June's remains were laid to rest in a quiet ceremony in Oregon. A small headstone bore her name, along with a line Harold had once written to her in a postcard, "Anywhere with you is home." A plaque was placed beside it, honoring both of them. Harold's body may never be recovered, but for the family this memorial became a place to grieve, to speak to both of them. The case, while no longer actively investigated, remains open, one of the most haunting cold cases in the Pacific Northwest. And the RV, still stored in evidence, has become something of a legend. Some say if you sit inside it long enough, you'll feel something cold brush your shoulder. Others claim you can hear static, just like a radio tuning into a station that's no longer there. But maybe the real haunting isn't the vehicle, or the lake, or the wilderness. Maybe it's the silence that follows, the questions never answered, the voices that went unheard, and the quiet horror of how two lives full of love and intention simply vanished into the cracks of history.